Hello, 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 and welcome back to the Diverse Thinking, Different Learning podcast. I am your host, Dr. Karen Wilson. Today, I am speaking with Rachel Kapp, who is a board-certified educational therapist. She is a colleague, contributor to Child Nexus, and she's doing incredible work in her practice. She believes that every student can be taught how to learn in a way that works for them, and I completely agree. Rachel has been on the podcast before discussing educational therapy, and today she's back to talk about the effectiveness of virtual educational therapy. How is it different than in person, and who benefits from this particular format? Let's dig in.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Rachel Kapp, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Karen. I always love chatting with you.
I love chatting with you too. And I was looking back at my notes, and you were on the podcast in the very early days. It was actually episode 10. Episode 10.
What's funny about that is episode 10 is a podcast I frequently send people to from our podcast.
Yeah.
So it's funny that that's the one that I was on for you, but in the early days. And congratulations on making it so many episodes in. So many podcasters stop after 10 episodes, right? Because it's so much work, but congratulations.
Thank you so much. I think you had, on that episode, you had actually introduced the concept of educational therapy to the listeners. So I'm going to link back to it. But it was like a really great intro to that topic. And I think you also wrote a wonderful article around the same time. It was the intersection of executive function, ADHD, and other learning differences, which is also brilliant, and I will link to in the show notes. But love having you as part of this community. Love collaborating with you. And I think back to episode 10, and so much has changed in the world and in our lives.
Yes,
since you were here last.
Yes.
For one, there was a global pandemic. Which really changed a lot in terms of the delivery of interventions for students who think and learn differently. And for many parents, there was the trauma of remote learning during that time, which went on seemingly for years.
I mean, I was like looking back at notes of episodes we were producing during that time, and everybody thought like the kids were going to go back in the fall. And then it was like, well, in a month. And then they just went a whole school year and nobody went back. It really was a dramatic and traumatic time for all of us. It's kind of like the before and after. It's this generation sort of 9/11. Like we will always remember those early days where life just changed so quickly.
It did. It really did. And it's interesting because we learned a lot about students during that time. I often say that parents for the first time got a look at their kids who think and learn differently. We're able to see up close, this is where my child is struggling. This is what they look like in the school environment.
This is what the teachers have been trying to say. I see it now. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Or they were seeing things that the teachers had not picked up on because the teacher has 30 kids in the class and this mom has 2, and she can really see what's happening.
And they were also seeing the online portals for the first time and their learners trying to navigate it and all the various things that make online portals tricky, while also can be a supportive tool, but they're tricky. And parents were seeing that and they were saying, I'm confused by this. I get why my kid is confused or can't find X, Y, and Z because I can't find it either. So there was a lot of learning that occurred in that period of time.
There really was. And that's really where a lot of, telemedicine took off, telehealth, a lot of virtual interventions, whether that be speech and language therapy, educational therapy. And that's one of the reasons why I reached out to you again, because, as I talk to parents whose kids are struggling and they're looking for interventions like educational therapy, they need those interventions. And I know that more and more people since the pandemic have been offering virtual educational therapy. And I would love for parents who are looking at this as an option, who are thinking about it, who have questions about it. They may know what educational therapy is, but what does virtual educational therapy look like? Who is it appropriate for? Is the response to treatment the same? So many things I want to ask you, but for those who might not even know what educational therapy is, we can even start there in terms of describing what it is for people who may not have listened to episode 10, who may not be familiar with it. And then we'll kind of move into the virtual format.
Fantastic. So as educational therapists, we work with learners one-on-one with different learning needs. So to help them become independent and autonomous, as my podcast host, Steph, always says, our job is to teach them how to learn and who they are as learners in the classroom and in the world. And at my practice, Kapp Educational Therapy Group, we focus on learners who have ADHD and or executive functioning skills challenges and teach them how to become independent, autonomous learners. And the beautiful byproduct of good intervention at our practice is that family and home life improves and anxiety mitigates as a result of knowing how to do school, in quotes.
Absolutely. And sounds like it's really about giving students the tools that they need in order to be successful and teaching them the strategies that will help them and serve them and help them to compensate for their areas of weakness, but really lean into their strengths so that they can do the things that they are capable of doing.
Exactly. We're absolutely giving academic and learning skills, but really we're offering life skills.
I mean, you mentioned executive functioning, and executive functioning is so much more than, something that impacts academics. It is a life skill. It impacts every aspect of a person's daily functioning.
I mean, getting laundry done is an executive functioning task. Planning a meal is an executive functioning task. Making sure that you have enough gas in the car to get to your destination is an executive functioning task. All these things take the executive functioning part of your brain in order to become achievable and successful tasks for you. And it can be overwhelming to a lot of people. And if you don't have those foundational skills, it can be really, really misconstrued as a lot of things that it isn't. It is not laziness. It is not apathy. People who struggle with executive functioning skills just need a little bit of support. And also, they are working twice as hard as their peers who do have executive functioning skills and getting twice as much out of it. So we have to be really careful about the messaging that they're hearing because it's not laziness. It's not apathy. We just got to coach them up a little bit and they're going to be fine.
Yes, absolutely. And that's where educational therapy can be so helpful for students, for learners, even for adults who are struggling with executive functioning and other kind of processing and learning challenges.
I love working with the adults, Karen. It's so fun to work with adults who are struggling with executive functioning because they take extremely quick action and because they want the improvement. And also it's a relief to them because they've been struggling for a long time. It's great to work with adults.
So how is virtual educational therapy different than in-person ed therapy, or is there a difference?
So there are differences, but they're not meaningful enough, in my opinion, and from what I see in my practice. So I'll start there. I think it depends on the population and what skills you're looking to sort of develop. I also think it depends on the age of the learner. So it's not for everybody. That being said, 75% of my practice at this point is virtual, and it has been for years now. I don't see it ever sort of going back. The quality of the intervention that we're able to achieve is as high quality as we were able to achieve in person. And there's a lot of really, really wonderful things about the virtual work that we can't offer for forcing learners to come in person. So the virtues include, first of all, it's not Zoom school. And like, we have to start there and make sure that parents and learners who have been traumatized by Zoom school understand that it's not Zoom school. This is one-on-one intervention. This is manageable. This is achievable. And also, ed therapy is work that learners are doing anyway. And so one of my personal goals is to create more free time for the learners that we work with. We don't want learning to get in the way, so to speak, of the fun stuff they want to do. So just by virtue of the fact that they can log on to meet with us, it saves them so much time than having to get in the car. And for learners who don't live locally, this is a blessing for them because they have access to a resource that they may have otherwise not had access to, because ed therapy isn't everywhere yet. We're working on it. And so location doesn't have to matter anymore. We're also able to do things like work with learners during their day, during their free period. And that has been extremely meaningful, particularly for students who are athletes and who are highly competitive and in intense training after school and things like that, or are actors or musicians or, whatever kids are deeply into. It allows them that free time and free space. So there's a lot more flexibility that can be offered. I think one of the concerns that parents have is that the connection between clinician and client maybe won't be there. We are finding a lot that parents are asking for in person, and then within 2 to 3 sessions, it moves virtual. And it happens consistently enough that it's predictable at this point. The truth of the matter is that sometimes the in-person initial sessions, if feasible, are really for the parent because they've been traumatized and they're worried about that connection. I have not found a difference at all in the quality of the interaction that I'm having with the learners because we're still having them do the vulnerable work of showing us their portals, their emails, the quality of the work that they're submitting. We can still attend to their physical systems and help support them and make sure that they know where everything is and have rules about how everything has to be done. If we're in person, we're on their computer anyway, because one of the systems we have to look at is their digital system for organization. And the kids are much more tech forward than we were at that age. And so they're incredibly comfortable with it. We as clinicians, in my practice, really like the digital work. It's meaningful, it's impactful, and it's quality work for the families that we're working with. We have found that learners are still graduating out of educational therapy at the same rate after the same amount of time. They're staying in the practice. It's not like one is faster than the other. And a learner, and I think another concern that parents will have is, especially in my practice, they're coming because they have attentional challenges. They struggle with attending. And I get it. Like I putting them in front of the computer can feel risky to parents when the kid wants to naturally be on YouTube. But when it's one-on-one work and when the relationship that we have with the client is meaningful, they'll try to do stuff and try to but we see it, right? That's another way that it's not Zoom school. Like, it's because of that one-on-one, we can tell if and when we've lost them, but we're able to keep it fun and exciting. And once they see the impact that it can have, incredibly meaningful for families. And sometimes it can even be the sessions are shorter because we're able to say, you know what, I want to give you a little bit of space to do the work without me watching you do the work. Like, that's the step that we're on, is trying you trying it out. And so there's a lot more flexibility in how we spend. But most of our clients are 50 minutes twice a week. So we have flexibility in how we spend that 100 minutes. Doesn't necessarily have to be 50 minutes and 50 minutes.
Right.
So there's just a lot that's really wonderful about that opportunity.
Right. And it seems like the rapport that you're building, the relationship continues to be meaningful even when the educational therapy is delivered remotely. You can still have a huge impact and see the kinds of outcomes that you want to see in the same way you would if you were delivering it in person. And logistically, it works out so much better for so many families because especially in the Los Angeles area, traffic getting to and from can be, 2 hours in commuting.
I mean, we used to get calls from families who would live on the other side of the 405, and now we're like the SNL sketch where they talk about the directions in LA. But if they lived on the wrong side of the freeway, I would just say, like, I think they're a perfect fit for our practice, but it's not a perfect fit for your life because I don't want them in the car for 2 hours.
Right.
And so some parents are open to it, and some parents we have to sort of say, well, let's try it out and see. And we can work through that like sort of trauma together. But I have clients that I've never met in person. I've been exclusively virtual for 3 years, and I'm deeply connected with these kids that I'm working with and with the adults that I work with. And we've even had some of the kids who've been exclusively virtual come on our podcast and share their experience. And they were reluctant initially. But if you can build that trust, it really is a special relationship that we're lucky to build with our clients. I mean, the goal is to graduate them out. And but that doesn't mean that the relationship that I have with them ends at that point. They check in over the years. I'll get a picture of them like setting up their systems at the beginning of the year. See, Rachel, I'm doing it. It's really I love the work that we get to do.
Absolutely. Now, we know that educational therapy is effective for addressing struggles with reading, writing, math, as well as processing issues like executive functioning. Now, does remote educational therapy work better when addressing a particular area of struggle? I know that you do a lot of work in executive functioning.
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that maybe I'm not the most qualified to answer because our work is fairly focused at Kapp Therapy Group.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to be honest about that. It's incredibly effective for our work. But underlying the executive functioning issues are things like reading comprehension struggles or managing large multi-step projects, or writing is a tremendous area of need for the learners that we work with. And so all of those are really easily accessible through the work that we are doing virtually. And one of the virtues of hiring an educational therapist is that you're relying on the creativity of the ed therapist and the knowledge of the ed therapist to pull from all these different resources and programs to design something that really works best for that particular learner. And so I think a quality educational therapist, which I've never met an ed therapist that isn't quality, but a quality educational therapist should be able to provide that intervention and have the tech savviness that they're doing virtual work to do meaningful virtual work.
Right. And like you're saying, executive functioning, impacts so many other aspects of daily functioning, but it has a significant impact on writing. I think writing is one of the most challenging tasks for individuals who have executive functioning difficulties in terms of the reading, writing, and math, basics.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I know that when I'm talking to a parent who is calling about their learner and they haven't even brought up writing, I bring it up and they're like, oh yeah, that too. Because they don't necessarily conceive of it as being like a part of the reason that, their kid can't get out the door on time they don't see the correlation with writing. But writing, we always say, is the ultimate executive functioning skills task. You have to first of all, you have to understand the prompt. And that can be a journey because especially as kids get older and in the later grades of school, the prompts don't have a question. So you really have to teach the learners how to interpret something that's just a bunch of text with no answerable question. And then you have to remember the information that you're writing on. You have to attend to the mechanics of writing and the rules of writing. And so there's just so much. And you're also looking at a blank page. And you also have anxiety probably about writing and you feel overwhelm and avoidance about it. So it's incredibly effective work virtually because, to be honest, even when we were in person, we were using the computer to kind of get through these tasks. So the virtual work is great if I haven't been enough of a fan of it.
Absolutely. And one of the things that really is sticking out to me is that it can really be effective for students who are struggling in so many different ways. Yes, executive functioning is an area you focus on, but executive functioning in and of itself impacts reading comprehension. It impacts writing. It impacts your ability to follow steps for a math word problem. And so being able to access educational therapy virtually can have a significant impact on students who are struggling and in so many different areas.
Absolutely, especially if they're over a certain age.
Yes. That's my next question is about the age of the learner. Like, is there an ideal student for virtual educational therapy?
So this is going to be student dependent, right? Like every answer that I would give. And that's why you need to talk to the clinician and sort of like pick their brain about what they think too, because trust the professionals that you're hiring to kind of guide you through this process a little bit. I find that learners who are really 5th grade and up are the ideal sort of age range. Will I work with a learner younger? Sometimes. It really depends at that point. What I will say is if the learner is struggling with decoding, I think sometimes, and decoding is breaking down letters into sounds into words. If they're struggling with that aspect of reading, I sometimes think in person is better if that's an option. But it's not to say that virtual is bad. Sometimes something is just preferential for one learner over another. And it just depends on who they are.
Right. And that brings us back to one of the things you said earlier is that it's not for everybody. I think about, a 5-year-old, 6-year-old who's struggling with kind of keeping, his body still and might be struggling with those early, phonological processing skills. That may not be the best format for providing that educational therapy support if you can't get them to sit still and you've got to tell them to come back to the computer and, a dog comes into the room and they go off playing with the dog. And so you have to know your learner and to know whether or not it's appropriate for them.
And I'll also say this, a quality interventionist, and I think this is true across the board of us in the helping profession, if it's not a right fit and you try it out and it's not a right fit and it's either not working for the clinician or it's not working for the family or it's not working for the client themselves, then that conversation will be had. Nobody's going to keep a kid in intervention or an adult in intervention that's not meaningful. So that's where the professional judgment of the clinician and the family needs to come into play.
Right. And that really, because, we talked about kind of the virtues of educational therapy, the benefits of educational therapy. And, with any time that there is an advantage, there's usually a downside. But it sounds like the downside would be that they're just not a good fit for that format of educational therapy or for that pairing of therapist and child. And then, and then you can move on and make sure you connect that family, that learner with the intervention that will work for them.
I think that's why it's really important as clinicians and professionals that we ask the right questions when we're initially talking to families. Because if you're asking the right sort of screening questions to families, you'll be able to usually figure that out on that phone call. Sometimes things happen and families see things differently than how you're seeing them virtually. I mean, that's rare for us at this point, but all sorts of things can happen. And so the good news is that with resources like Child Nexus and all the professionals that you've kind of gathered together, we do have resources that we can share with families if we're not the right fit. And sometimes families sign up for a call with us and it's very clear to me from their sign up, oh, I'm not what you need, but this is who you need. And then we'll make that introduction.
Right. And, when it is the right fit, there are so many advantages we know for educational therapy in general, but the virtual format is so accessible to so many families who may not have an educational therapist in their area or one that does the kind of work that their learner needs. And to know that, you can have great outcomes, you can still build rapport and have a meaningful relationship with the clinician. You can still have the ability to observe students and their work in the virtual format. Because I know that's something that parents worry about. You can still see what it is that they're doing. You can still...
not only do I see, but I mean, I have access to their online portal and to their email, whether they're in session or not. We get all that information. And so by letting us kind of do our job, parents can also take a step back from doing the monitoring. I mean, at this point, due to opportunities like this, being on your podcast or our own podcast, Kapp Ed Therapy Group and My Ed Therapist are national at this point, and we frequently work with learners who are in different states. And so obviously that work is never going to be an option in person. And we're never going to get, oftentimes, I mean, sometimes we live in LA, so it's like a destination and families will come and we'll meet at that point. But oftentimes there are people that will just never meet in person. But what's so interesting about the work that we do, even when we connect with the school, everybody has the same heart and is very heart forward, if that is the right word. We're all like heart-centered professionals in this helping field.
Right. And I think that's one of the reasons why we do the work that we do, because we're passionate about helping learners, access the skills and to really thrive and demonstrate all that they know and all that they can be in whatever environment they're in.
Yeah. My only advice to families is to connect with the clinician that you connect with. And if they're giving you advice that feels different, obviously ask the follow-up questions or advice that feels different from what you were expecting or hoping for. But be open to an alternative solution, because what I always tell families is the most important thing is clinician match and availability of the learner, frankly. And like very, very low third on that list is whether it's in person versus virtual. Like it should not be for the work that we do, the deciding factor, I believe.
Yeah. And it sounds like from everything that you've said, it's just such a big advantage for so many of our learners. Rachel, thank you so much for being here. If parents want to know more about you, your practice, about how educational therapy can help their learner, what is the best way for them to reach you?
So the best way to reach me is by going to our website, which is www.kappedtherapy.com. That's KAPPED therapy.com, and sign up for a phone call. That's also where you'll be able to get linked to my podcast as well, Learn Smarter Podcast.
Wonderful. And I will be sure to put links to that information in the show notes. Rachel, thanks again. It's always so wonderful to speak with you. And thanks for all that you do.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Rachel. To learn more about her work and about Kapp Educational Therapy, be sure to check out the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.